Fáilte a Cháirde Gael. Welcome to episode 58 of the Rebel Matters podcast. I'm going to set the scene for you here so you know what the crack is, but it's Friday evening down here in Cork. It is lashing rain outside. I was just looking out at the traffic. It's 5:30 and there's a big line of traffic of people trying to get home, and I'm sitting in the room here which is filled up with incense. The lights are turned down low. I've been listening back to the chats that I had with this week's guest on the podcast, Steve Lally, and I've also been listening to Crangbin, their track which is called the Number 3, which is a class track, and also got me thinking about another one of my favourite tracks at the moment, which is a track by Aphex Twin from their Selected Ambient Works album, Volume 2, and that track is also called Number 3. Funny enough, it's the third track on the album, so if you want to go and hunt those two down and put your headphones on and kick back and relax, then it's a good way to zone out for a while. Those two Number 3 tracks. And also, if you want to listen to that Aphex Twin track on YouTube, it's called Rhubarb. Rhubarb is the title of the track on YouTube, and it's got a class wee video of a monkey just sitting in water, and it's a really nice video just to watch and listen to and just kick back and chill out for a little while. Anyway, I think it's really going to enjoy this episode of the podcast. I think for me it really sums up the reason why I started this podcast in the first place, which was just to be able to meet and connect with really interesting people and make new friends. And I want to just say Gura Ced Mila Maigad to Steve for first of all agreeing to do this podcast, but more importantly for inviting me to come up to the house that he shares with his wife Paula in South Armagh and bringing me into their house, giving me such a warm welcome, and then for just being so open and friendly doing the podcast episode. Like, we talked for hours. This podcast episode itself is about an hour and a half long, the conversation part of it, which is one of the longest ones, but we actually sat there and talked for about an hour before we hit record. And then after we finished the episode, we took to the back roads of South Armagh, and Steve gave me a class wee tour of the area. We went to see a ring fort that had a fairy tree in it. We went to T. Cullen, which is the place where Cullen was having a feast when Satanta trekked across the country to go to Cullen's feast, and where he was attacked by Cullen's hound, and Satanta drove a slitter down his throat, killed the hound, and then assumed the name Cú Cullen. We were in the place that actually happened, and while we were driving there, we spotted something that I've never seen before in my life, but a massive rainbow that was like so colourful, and I could see both ends of the rainbow. Like, you could see the start of the rainbow, and then there was the bow, and then there was the other side, and I've never seen that before. So we actually just jumped out of the car and just looked at that for a while and kind of appreciated the beauty of it. Then we went to Inniskeen, where Patrick Kavanagh is buried, and there is also a church there that Brian Boru was brought to after he was killed at the Battle of Clontarf, and they were making their way back, and they brought his body in there. And it's a really magical place. There's so much heritage and culture up there, both like historic and from like a folklore point of view, and also in more recent times as well. Like, South Armagh is called the banded country for a reason, and that reason being that there are people who have never been afraid to stand up for themselves, and they brought the fight to the British Army for sure. Around South Armagh, the only way that the British Army could travel whenever they were there was by helicopter, because of the fact that the South Armagh Brigade were so deadly. And you can get a sense of the pride that people have in their more recent history, and also their more like ancient history as well. So it was great to be up there. I actually recorded this episode the day after Kneecap played in the Academy in Dublin. I rented a car for the weekend because I knew I was going to be doing a bit of driving around. Drove up to Dublin, went to the gig, had a great night afterwards in Wigwam, even though someone stole my jacket and my hat at the after party. So if that person is listening out there, then you're in fucking big trouble, but I hope you're enjoying my lovely hat and also my jacket. But apart from that, it was a class night. The next day I got up and went around to the Bang Bang Cafe in Phibsborough about 9 o'clock in the morning, and Anya in the Bang Bang sorted me out with 2 good strong cups of coffee and a delicious breakfast, and then I hit the road up to South Armagh and had a great time with Steve and with Paula also. Also, massive shout out to Charles and Andrew from TPM, because they are the ones that hooked us up, myself and Steve, and put us in touch with each other. I'm really glad that they did, because I know that now, like, myself and Steve have kind of become friends now, like, and same as with a lot of the podcast guests that have been on so far. And it's a really nice way to connect with people, and at the end of the day, like, what's more important than just connecting with each other and getting to spend some, like, sort of what would be the word? Just spend some kind of intentional time with another person, speaking to each other, and not being connected to the digital world for a while. And in a way, that kind of is maybe a good way to run into the conversation that we had together, because I think that a lot of the importance of folklore is to do with getting back to our roots and taking the lessons from the stories that have gone by and that have been handed down from generation to generation, and everything that goes along with it. It's just it's a really rich form of handing down of knowledge and of customs, and something that, like, I suppose isn't, maybe I think that is making a comeback now, like, but we need to be careful to preserve it and also to respect it and give it its proper place, because at the end of the day, like, we're in Ireland here, like, we have a massive history and a really rich history of passing information and customs down orally, and it's important that we keep that, which is another reason why I'm very grateful for Steve and other people who have sort of dedicated their lives to being storytellers and folklorists and preserving stories, writing new stories, and yeah, it's class. So I've got a few more of these folklore episodes as well. I said I was going to do that ages ago, so you can look forward to them coming out, and I know you're going to enjoy this one, because I really enjoyed going up and recording it in the first place, and I really enjoyed listening back to it as well, especially on this rainy afternoon, where it's nice to be cooped up in a wee warm room with incense, listening to some tunes and hearing Steve talk about how he became a storyteller and recounting some of his stories and going a little bit deeper on some of the topics as well. So we'll get stuck into it there now. And just one more thing before we do is, as usual, there's a little bit of Roald Dahl at the end of the episode. So if you want a bit of a bedtime story, just let the outro music play out and stay tuned. And I'll be reading a chapter or so from Roald Dahl's book, Boy, Tales of Childhood. Of course, the Patreon account is still connected to this podcast, and if you want to become a patron of the Rebel Matters podcast, you can do that by going to rebelmatters.ie, where you can find all the rest of the episodes and also a link to the Patreon account, and you can, like, sign up for making a monthly contribution if you want to, which really helps to cover the cost of making the episodes, like travelling to places to meet people, doing all the production on it, and even like the cost of getting the few bits of equipment and stuff that are required to be able to keep on banging out the podcast consistently at a high level. And yeah, listen back to the other episodes as well. If this is your first time tuning into the Rebel Matters podcast, like, this is the 50th episode, so there's a massively, like, diverse bunch of episodes that have come before this one, so feel free to go back and listen to them. And as always, like, get in touch if you have any comments or suggestions or anything like that there, then you can just, like, hit me up on social media. Instagram is probably the best one, and if you feel like giving the podcast a review on iTunes, then that'd be greatly appreciated as well. Anyway, Cardigale, let's get stuck into the 58th episode of the Rebel Matters podcast with Steve Lally. First of all, thanks very much for taking the time to do the podcast with me.
No problem at all, Anna. More than happy.
I've been thinking about this kind of storytelling series and folklore series that I'm working on, and trying to come up with a nice way of opening the episodes. And I think the one thing that's the one kind of question that springs to mind that I've always been really interested to ask people is, what was it that inspired you to become a storyteller?
Okay, yeah, well that's a good way to get the ball rolling. My grandmother was a Shanachie from Galway, the Wild West, or as my mother would say, the West is the best. And probably that goes for Belfast too.
Yeah, I know. It's definitely the Wild West anyway up there.
But my grandmother, she was from the west of Ireland, Shanachie storyteller. And when I was a young fella, I mean, you're going way, way, way back now. We're going back to early 80s and stuff. And when we used to go and stay with her, I grew up in Kildare, and we go every other month or something to go down and see her. And I loved it because you had Salt Hill and you had all the crack and plenty of ice cream, and then granny stories, you know. So I used to sit in her knee at night and she'd just tell me stories about the Banshee and the Puka and changelings, and scared the living shite out of me. But I loved it, absolutely loved it, and it just stayed with me. And after she died, it was funny. I was very young at the time when she died. I was only about 9 or so when she died, but I was very. It was funny, like, at that age you don't really, there was other, older people in the family and then it just didn't register with me, whereas this, it did, and I used to just, I think about her stories and stuff, and I would keep it alive. And then my father, Lord of Mercy, he used to get me books on mythology and folklore and stuff, and because he saw, like, that, I had an interest in it, because I'd be asking him about this stuff, and that's really where that's what sowed the seed. It was my grandmother, and then afterwards my dad. He encouraged it because he saw, Jesus, I might get him reading. Isn't that great? I remember Dad. One of the books that he got me was a beautiful book by a guy called. She had it here. This is it here. It's a guy called James Stevens, and it's called Irish Fairy Tales, and it's illustrated by a chap called Arthur Rackham, who was probably, in my mind, I would say, the best illustrator of Irish folk and fairy stories and stuff like that. But it was he would read these to me, and it's just that stuff. That's some of his illustrations.
It's interesting that the illustrations play such an important role in, like, fairy tales, and is that because we're such an oral tradition, and that the, like, writing stories out has only been a recent really development in Irish folklore, whereas imagery has probably been around for longer than...
Imagery is very important. Even in Irish culture, imagery is terribly important. Even religion, there's always a bloody Sacred Heart on the wall or something. You know what I mean? It's all about imagery and symbolism. And in my own books, I've 4 books now on Irish folklore, and I illustrate them all myself. And the illustrations to me are just as important, and sometimes even more important, depending on, because it's the illustration that attracts the person to the book. A person isn't attracted to the book by a page full of words. If they see a nice illustration or something that catches their interest, that gets them reading. And
the other thing I found with some of the folklore and fairy story books that I have is that, when you're telling a story to someone, you have a certain imagery inside your head, and then you tell the story to them, they have a certain imagery inside their head. It might not be the same, but then when you see the drawing or whatever in the book, you're like, oh, that's what this person sees.
Yes.
When they're telling this story, and it kind of puts things into a little bit of a context or something.
Absolutely. Well, I have this is a copy of the latest one that we've written, myself and my wife, Paula, Irish Gothic, and I'll just show you this.
This one here, this first one you showed me is from 1924.
Yeah, it's very old. I'll just show you. This is the illustration to the Banshee. So the idea is that you don't really know what she looks like, but you don't go near her.
That's get making the hair on my arm stand up watching that now, like the back of my neck is standing up. You know why? I think it's because you remember that movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People?
Yes.
The Banshee in that, quite similar, like you could kind of see through her.
Yes.
You weren't really sure was it really a woman, or but you could hear she was crying, and you're like, it used to scare the shit out of me when I was a kid.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, so that's what I did, Anna, to sort of treat these particular ones, because you know, the she. I mean, and then I did like that's the Puka horse now, which is obviously a horse, but I sort of tried to give it a kind of an element of almost a human. There's a human element as well there, you know. And then,
but the fear got in there.
But whenever I did the actual the good folk, the fairy folk, let me see. I was trying to find. Yeah, no, that's not the one. There's one here. Sorry, this is the sort of thing, because we had terrible trouble writing this book. Both of us got very sick and stuff, and so weird stuff was happening, like proper poltergeists, you know, paranormal activity type of thing. Paulie had terrible nightmares. You know, like this the fairies there now. That's
yeah.
You don't know what they look like, and you know, in a lot of stories about the Shiada, the good folk, they're described as having indescribable faces. Some people have described them as being so terrifying that to describe them would drive you mad, you know, and. You know, and that's the thing that we were trying to get across in this book, that the Shiada, first of all, they're not called fairies. Fairies is an English word, doesn't exist in Irish. It's an Anglicisation of the Shiada, the she. Of course, Banshee means woman of the fairies, and as I say to the children, now boys and girls, when you think about the Banshee, do you think about Tinkerbell? And they go, no. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And, you know, in this book we tried to get that across, that the Shiada are actually descended from gods. They were the two of the Don, and the problem was that when Christianity came in, you know, they were the gods. That's who the people worshipped, and they were all powerful. When Christianity came in, their power started to decrease. One of their great leaders was Lugh of the Silver Arm, which County Louth is named after. Lugh actually got demoted because he was no longer a god, and he became a cobbler. And he changed his name to Luthercon, which eventually became the Leprechaun. So it's it just shows you how a powerful god that defeated the Fomorian became a feckin' leprechaun, you know? And that's sort of what happened in Irish folklore, that it got kind of watered down and stuff like that. Another example of it was the Banfasses. I don't know if you ever heard the Banfasses, the wise women. And they knew all the herbs and the cures and stuff. Now, they were also known as fairy doctors. But again, when, you know, the church and stuff got involved and all that stuff, society got involved, these women were feared, and A, because they were women, B, because they knew what they were doing, and C, because what they did actually bloody worked. Because the doctors at the time, if you had a sore leg, they just cut it off. These women would cure it for you. So eventually the Banfasses became known as Cailleachs, which is basically a witch. And you know what happened to witches back in the old days. So the same thing kind of happened to the fairies, that they were sort of dumbed down a bit, or made to be feared, but not in a healthy way. Yes, it's wise to fear them, but it's also more important to respect them, you know. And, you know, you have to remember that we come from a culture, not a people, a culture that goes back thousands of years, you know. So, I was in a boxing club years ago, and I remember Seamus the boy, he says, right, you're all descended from kings, he'd say to us, you know, and don't forget that. And, you know, and I think, you know, sadly, you know, Irish culture is kind of sold out in that sense. When it comes to that sort of, like, you know, the carols, gift shops and stuff like that. And the fact of the matter is that it's such an important and a rich culture, the stories of the Shiada, the good folk. What people don't realise is that things like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, even Star Wars was influenced by these stories, you know. But the Irish people don't take credit for it, but it's the old story. These other people come in and take credit for stuff that they rearranged for themselves. And so we just wanted to try and explain that these stories are ours. They're from this country. They're thousands of years old, some of them. They're handed down word of mouth, the old tradition. It was only really in the kind of 1700s with people like 1700s, early 1800s thereabouts. You had people like William Carleton and Patrick Kennedy, and then later on you had William Butler Yeats and Lady Gregory, and of course Douglas Hyde, and blah 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 blah. They were all academics, you know, and a lot of them were kind of like West Brits, I suppose, you know, and they kind of took it, which was great, but they made it. They took the difference between a story and an academic kind of thing is academia is the same thing, but you just take the crack out of it, you know, and that's what they did. I mean, if you ever read it, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Yeats. I think I love his poetry and stuff, but some of the stuff is very heavy going, especially Lady Gregory and stuff like that. And then it wasn't until things started really. So I'm going off on a tangent here.
No, keep going, because it's really interesting. There's so many things that I'm just kind of trying to remember to ask you about again. But I've read some of the stories that have been written down and edited by Lady Gregory and by Yeats as well. I actually visited Cool Park recently, which was amazing, just to walk around that and see.
Cool.
But then I was also speaking to a storyteller from Cork recently, Maria Gillen, and you know, we started a storytelling night down at Cork recently on the full moon, and you know, like anything to get something like that going, like there had to be a few of us who were going to say, right, we definitely have to have some stories ready to tell here, like, and we're not like storytellers by really any stretch of the imagination as much as the next person. So we were like, right, okay, I'll try and learn this story off by heart from this book, and then at least I'll have something to bring to the table, and somebody else would do the same. And Maria was saying, you know, that's good, but storytelling's not about learning stories off by heart. And I guess that kind of goes back to the thing of the written down stories only being a recent thing.
Yes.
And probably ties in with the academic side of it, where they're, you know, in a way I can see that the stories that have been written down over the last couple of 100 years is a good way of preserving it. But in reality, like the true storytelling, when I think of it in my head, is like in a cottage on the side of a mountain around the fireplace when everyone's huddled around.
Do you know what it's like? It's like the difference in going and seeing the real band and a cover band. That's basically what it is. The old stories were the real thing. They were the real, that was authentic. You know, you have to remember as well, like one kid said to me once, like when I was telling stories in school, and he said, oh, you know, they're good, there's no special effects. And I said, yeah, but you know, you put yourself 200 years ago in a cottage in the middle of nowhere where there's no electricity and it's dark and you have to walk home and you have to hear stories about the Banshee, and you start hearing things in the hedges. Believe me, the special effects aren't long coming, you know.
I remember hearing stories about the Banshee, and after watching Darby O'Gillen around that time, and then the next thing you'd be lying in bed and you just hear, oh, you're winning. Oh, shit, that's the Banshee.
It's the Banshee, yeah, exactly. But see, the thing is, I mean, you know, the thing about the old tradition as well is you know, the majority of people who were telling these stories couldn't read or write. And when they did speak, it was Oscailga. So what happened was, years later, when these stories were being recorded and written down, the ones that were recorded, the majority of them couldn't speak Irish, so they had to be translated into English. Now, as you well know, Irish is a fantastic language. It's a bit like it's like poetry. You know, you can, like, for example, like, you know, in English you'd say he ran very fast, but in Irish say, you know, Rishi or Nos Naguihe, he ran as fast as the wind. You know, that's the difference. It just takes it up another level. Do you know what I mean? And when these stories were written down, they were translated into English, which basically diluted them to a certain extent, linguistically. And to really get that real sense of an authentic folk story was to hear it from a storyteller, with the accent, with the turn of phrase. You know, the other thing as well, right, in Irish folklore, the fairies all speak Irish. The Sheila, because they're an ancient race, they don't recognise English as a language. That's not, you know, that's just doesn't exist as far as they're concerned. So, like, you know, the other thing is, like, you know, when you're telling a story about the Sheila or something, you know, it's I have a couple of folklore scale. I'm not fluent, but I have a few odd words. You know, I'd love to be able to. I'm going to have to go. I keep saying this, but I really want to go back and learn it properly, because to really give the stories justice, when the fairies are speaking it authentically, it's in Irish, you know. So, you know, but the thing is, like, that's all well and good, but the problem is, I mean, it's like I watched a thing about your brother's group.
Kneecap?
Yeah.
Yep.
And he was talking about, like, the Irish language and stuff, and he was saying there's no point in even attempting doing this unless you're fluent in it. Do you know what I mean? Because it's you know, and that's sort of what happened with the stories. Like, these people weren't fluent in Irish, you know, whatever. So they'd no choice but to translate it and into this language and stuff. And if you think about it, like, that would have taken away from the sort of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The potency of the language, you know, the way it was spoken. As well as that, if you think about it, like, when these stories were told, they were all told in Irish, you know, and you know, so when these were being recorded by book, it just didn't seem to have the same strength. So what I do as a storyteller is I travel around. I talk to fellas living in mountains, brewing their own poaching. Probably haven't seen a human being in 15 years, you know, but they're the boys you go and talk to, not the academics.
Yeah. Another thing you're mentioning there about the arrival of Christianity in the Ireland and how that affected
it's messed the whole thing up.
The passing on of the stories, and in a way, the way that you described it there is, you know, that's, thinking back, that's how I've heard it described before, in a way that the Christianity came to try and tried to kind of separate us from our more sort of pagan orientated type of culture, and tried to, I guess, in a way, it's nearly like a form of colonialism when you try and break down the native culture or the indigenous sort of the indigenous way of life and make it so that it seems quite barbarous or something like that, and then trying to bring your own stuff in.
That's right.
Which in a way is, when you look at like the likes of Halloween, where we've kind of kept some of that sort of pagan kind of sort of.
Halloween was invented in Ireland.
Yeah.
Iarna, Night of the Sound. You know, it's an Irish. Its roots are in Ireland. I mean, it's actually quite interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with the horror film Halloween. There's the third one, which is, it's a bit dodgy as a film, but they actually go into where Halloween originated in Ireland, which is quite interesting. You know, it's like, so Michael Myers wanted to come from Ireland, you know, but you know, it's just, I think, you know, when Christianity came, it happened in all cultures. The same thing happened in Norse culture. Same thing happened in Greek culture. You know, all these wonderful countries that had fantastic mythology, and it was somehow religion came along and tainted it. Like, when the early Christian monks came to Ireland, in all the monasteries they'd always have a shield and a gig, you know, which was harked back to the pagan times. And that was there's lots of theories on what the shield and the gig was. It pornography? Was it a warning? Was
fertility or something?
Fertility? Was it what? But really, what it was to connect with the local people, you know. And then years later, when a lot of the shield and the gigs were actually by the church, were asked to be destroyed.
A friend of mine actually goes around finding shield and gigs around Ireland and doing the 3D scanning on them to try and record where it was found and what condition it was in and that kind of stuff. The other thing, what when I speak to like the storytellers and stuff like that, like, it seems like even when we're talking here now, it feels like you have like a direct line to the stuff that we were doing 4,000 years ago and the stories that we were telling. And I'm interested to find out, look, what do you feel the importance of those stories is for today's society?
I think those stories are incredibly important. I mean, you heard what my friend said there on earlier, Raymond, about how we're so trapped in, you know, having the big house and the car and the money and and how we look and all this stuff, and, you know, X Factor, and, you know, the list goes on and on and on. These stories are a celebration of, basically a celebration of what it is to be alive, a celebration of the fact that, you know, that we and the earth are connected, and, you know, and it's a celebration of our ability to escape from whatever persecution, whether it be physical, whether it be mental, whether it be political, whatever the case it might be. You know, these stories now will just lift you away from that, take you away from that in a safe way, not like drugs or booze or that. You know, it can take you out of that bit of misery without a hangover or developing an addiction. You know, it's you know, I just think that they're, you know, it's so important to have a sense of self, have a sense of place, have a sense of belonging. Because if you don't have that, it's very easy to be knocked over. Do you know what I mean? Whereas if you have a strong sense of who you are, where you came from, who your ancestors were, why you're here, blah, 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 it's very hard for someone to kind of say, you know, you don't belong here, or, you know, who are you?
Yeah.
You know,
it's interesting that you say that, because we're right in the middle of bandit country here.
Yeah.
And in a way, what happened here going back the last couple of 100 years is that the Brits were here trying to break down the local culture so they could come in and put their own culture in place.
Exactly.
Which is what you're saying, is that like it's so important that we have a hold of our own sense of purpose. And is there a handing down of wisdom from generation to generation involved in storytelling like this?
Oh, very much so. Very, very much so. I mean, it was a wisdom of, you know, it's sort of like, yeah, it's a wisdom of, you know, first of all, the consequences of, you know, allowing something to come in that, and take away what you have and stuff like that. Now, you kind of go, what on earth is he talking about? What's that kind of... Well, there's a book, one of the earliest books of Irish folklore stories, mythology, is the Book of Invasions. That says it all, doesn't it? And the Book of Invasions, because the two of the Donnan, the Shiada were believed to be the original ruling race of Ireland, and then you had the Fomorian, the Furbolg, and eventually the Gael or the Celts, and it was supposedly them that they didn't defeat each other. The story was that they were actually on a level playing ground, and they had to come to a sort of an agreement. There we go. It's all very relative, so that they could basically share the earth together. But the Gael were cute, and when they said, "Listen, we'll have everything above the earth, and you can have everything below the earth," and the Shiada live below the earth, and that's why the fairy trees and stuff like that are sacred, because that's their watchtowers and stuff like that, and the fairy mounds and stuff. But of course, the Shiada realised afterwards, the fuckers tricked us. You know, we fucking own this place, and now we're living underneath the ground, and they've got all the good stuff up above. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And that's why the fairies, the Shiada, the good folk, whatever you want to call them, that's why that's why people are afraid of them, because they are very embittered by what happens to them. And they're like, you know, we were here first, and you fucked us over. And they basically, you know, if you mess with them, they will punish you, like, you know. And you know, there's a wisdom in that, like, you know, I mean, that's what happens. That's what happens if you take away someone's identity, if you take away someone's freedom, if you take away someone's right to fucking live, you're asking for trouble.
It's like the karmic cycle in a way.
Yeah.
And with the Shiada, like, there's the standing stones and the trees.
That's right.
And still today, people are not going to touch them.
No.
And there are probably some stories of people who did touch them.
Well, there's loads of stories. I mean, fairy trees is a big one. That's a big one, because they tend to grow. There's lots of names from the Connolly she oak, the lone bush, the hawthorn, the white thorn. Lots of names from them, but it's a big taboo to cut one of them down. And there's been myself and Paula, we were collecting the stories for our Irish Gothic. We heard lots of terrible stories about people who, you know, the fairy tree was cut down their land. There was like serious accidents. There was even suicides. There was infanticide. There was just horrendous stuff. I mean, horrendous stuff happened. And you know, again, it's like, you know, what these stories do, and what this is just a reminder that you know what, folks, you're only here for a short time, and these boys were here long before you, and they'll be here long before after you're gone. So treat them with a bit of respect, all right?
You mentioned that you both got sick when you were writing that book. Do you think that has a connection?
Oh, Jesus, yeah, definitely. I mean, they tested us. They definitely tested us. We thought we were scared. Like, we were thinking, are we opening up some sort of portal or something? Do you know what I mean? To like this other realm, you know, like like the film Poltergeist, you know, to the television. And no, because it was quite scary, Anna, because I got incredibly sick. I mean, really sick. I had to go to the hospital. Paula was getting terrible nightmares. We had the entire book on the hard drive on the computer. It got completely wiped. I'm not joking. You to write the whole. Oh, gee. Now I had some stuff from the laptop and also, but everything was gone from that. We took photographs on a camera of, you know, various sites and stuff like that. The camera was destroyed. It was dropped on the road, and the car it was almost like as soon as we finished taking them, I dropped the bloody camera, and the car went and smashed into pieces. You know, I mean, it was like loads of stuff. You know, there was. I'm trying to think of other things that happened. Like, yeah, there was a lot of stuff where, you know, when we were interviewing people, that people were afraid, they didn't want to talk about it. You know, the reason why they're called the good folk or the gentle folk is because it's believed they are always listening. So you have to talk about them respectfully, you know. The great folklorist and storyteller Eddie Lennon, who I interviewed for this book as well, you know, he calls them the other crowd, or the boys, you know. Don't mess with the boys. Mess with the boys, they mess with you. They're going to win. You know?
I mean, you were going around collecting the stories and talking to people about the boys there now. I'm kind of worried my car's going to be gone before I stay here or something like that now when we're having this conversation.
That's it.
Were there active sort of superstitions that people were still carrying out around their houses or around children or things like that?
Very, 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 very much so. Very much so. Yeah. There's a guy called Pat Noon. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before. You have to talk to Pat. Pat is great. Pat lives in Ballinasloe, County Galway. He's a farmer. And Pat owns a fairy field. And funny, it was Stephen McCollum from the Poxmen sent me a link to Pat's some documentary that was made about Pat Noon. And Pat's story is in it. Actually, I must get you a copy of the book before you go.
Thank you.
But he's the Galway story in it. And Janie Mac, like, I mean, Pat talk about carrying on traditions and all. I mean, he's got all, like, you ever see the film The Wicker Man?
Yeah.
He's got all the herbs and stuff hanging up inside in the house and everything. He's a healer as well, and he heals you with this copper wire and all the hoop that he puts, like a hula hoop, and he puts it up and down like that over you and takes all the negative energy away and all this kind of carry on. But he's a firm believer in the good folk. Now, he's actually an example of someone who knows his respect for the Sheila is amazing, and it's really interesting to see how his respect for the Sheila and how he totally chooses to live in harmony with them. Now, he's a farmer. He's got lots of land, but he will not touch the fairy field. The fairy field's massive. He won't plough it. He won't do anything to it. He won't cut those trees down. Whatever. Blah 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 blah. But yet, what's happened with Pat? Like the RTE found about him, did a wee documentary on. As a result, now people come from all over the world, busloads, to come and see Pat's fairy field. Now, you're good to the boys, they're good to you. Do you know what I mean? But you mess with them, you're a goner.
So then, how does that relate to the getting
so
sick?
What happened?
What did you do?
So my relation to this was I was absolutely terrified. So I phoned Pat. I says, Pat, I think they're trying to kill us. He was like, no. He was like, no. He says, they're just testing you. They're just testing you. He says, they want to see if you're willing to go. They want people to know their story, he told us. They want people to know about them, but they want the right people doing it. They don't want you doing a half-assed job. If you're going to do it right. and they're going to give you a few tests and put a few obstacles on your way and stuff like that, And I was like, really? And he goes, listen, he says, I wouldn't put you wrong. I wouldn't put you wrong at all. He says, and it was a real, it was a real sort of sense of relief and stuff. So what we did was, after speaking to Pat and stuff, I mean, it's tradition to leave milk, butter, stuff like that for the fairies, So we went. There's a fairy tree not far from here, and we went and we tied some rags onto it, and we just said, listen, I hope you don't mind us telling our stories, but we really appreciate it if you allow us, because we think they're very good. And it was a bit like anyone saw us, they would have thought these boys need locked up, But we did, and everything stopped after that. So I don't know. You tell me.
And in Ireland, like we're a rural country, and for a long time an agricultural country, and we're very connected to the land.
Very much so.
How much of the tradition of storytelling and the lessons behind the storytelling of the many thousands of years of storytelling that we have now are kind of I guess there to teach us about the land, and to teach us in a way, like if you even like 100 years ago, if you're living somewhere and you don't know, you're not familiar with your surroundings, or you're walking in the wrong place and you break your ankle, like that's it. You're not going to go to the hospital. Like you're going to have to, like a broken leg back then could mean the end of you. Like,
yeah.
So how much of those stories are built around teaching each other and handing over knowledge of the landscape and stuff too?
A huge amount of them. Funny, there's one that there's a story from County Offaly, a great storyteller from County Offaly. I was talking to Frank Bergen, smashing guy. He told me a beautiful story about people who were stealing holly, or not, hazel rods from a fairy mound to make baskets, and they all became crippled as a result. And what they did was they had to go back to the mound and throw the baskets onto the mound and return everything that they took, and then they were able to walk normally.
Regain the power of their legs.
Regain the power of their legs. But I mean, you look what looks happening in the world today. I mean, look at poor old Greta telling us what we're doing to the world, like with the environment and everything. These stories, it's very much about respecting the land, about like not, if you like the American Indians, if you're going to take something from the land, sort of be grateful for it and use it. Don't just waste it, don't just do it for pleasure, or everything has a function. Everything, basically, what the stories are about is if people just weren't so fucking greedy, or the reason why the land has been so tortured nowadays, the environment, is because people's greed for wealth and profit, and to have things, and that's why rainforests have been destroyed and all, because they need it for X, Y, and Z to produce whatever. And the same's happening in this country. The motorways being ploughed through places I remember as a child were beautiful places, and now they're just fucking concrete jungles now.
Yeah, one of the last ones actually shows just the motorway that was.
That's right. They cut through a mountain.
By here, yeah, I remember that was being built
through a mountain.
That was around 2004 or something.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, no, the stories are very, very much about that, and that. I mean, it was very interesting. Like it was even recorded. Like I know, like William Carlton and people like that would have recorded folklore from a long time ago, and they were going around to the ordinary people. This was before the famine and stuff like that, and they were just saying how healthy they were and stuff like that. The ordinary folk, the country folk, but a lot of the wealthier people suffered from gout and stuff like that because of the bad diets they were on, and no fresh fruit or vegetables. Everything was meat and bread, so all their teeth were gone and stuff, and and they also believed that the famine was caused by the fairies. Funny enough, there's one belief that the famine was a reaction of the fairies to what was happening to the land from foreign invaders. So they made the land so poisonous.
Like they hit the self-destruct button?
They hit and just to get as like, okay, if you're gonna, well, we're just gonna shut down, So there's a theory about that as well, and it's in the book as well about that. So yeah, the land, these stories, very, very, very much connected, very much about respecting your surroundings, respecting the people around you, just taking what you need, not what you want, what you need, and. And sharing and looking after each other and stuff like that. And it's the same in all the stories. You'll find the same thing. It's like if you just show them a bit of respect. There's a beautiful, beautiful story from County Monaghan in there about a guy who meets the king of the fairies and he brings him back to his kingdom. It's a beautiful story. Oh, it's so beautiful. And it describes them riding across this lake on horses, but the lake is frozen and it sounds like glass underneath the feet of the horses. And it describes the sky being filled with thousands and thousands of flying geese, and it says that the sky was black, like it was full of midges, and just all this stuff. And eventually he gets him to the place, and he brings them to a feast. Now the guy doesn't eat because not to eat the food of the Sheila, otherwise you'll never leave. The other thing is, if you steal their gold, you're in trouble as well. So he didn't eat. Then he was put up in a room for the night. The room was full of gold and jewels. He didn't touch any of it, and as a result, the guy brought him back to his home and said, anytime you need anything at all, you just he gave him, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he gave him, it's like a cup or something, and the money will appear in the cup, And the guy said, why are you being so kind to me? Like, why are you being so nice to me? He says, because whenever any of your kind humans come into our world, they either steal stuff, they either wreck something, they either, take the piss out of it, and it's just basically saying that's what people do. But no, you showed a bit of respect, you were nice, you were friendly, you were polite. Yeah, fair. If everyone was like that, sure, we'd be flying. And that's really what it is, like, and so there's lots and lots of stories about that. The other thing is, children and stuff. The fairies, if the fairies thought that parents were abusive towards a child, they would take the child and replace it with a demon. Change those boys now. They'd sort you out, That's great stories about them. But it was. They always believed that it was families that children were being neglected or whatever, that they were taken. And they were taken by the fairies, but they were looked after. Are you familiar with the poem "The Stolen Child" by Yeats? I'll give you a wee bit of it. It's beautiful. With a wave of moonlight glosses, the dim grey sands with light, and far by farthest Rosses we footed all the night, and weaving olden dances and mingling hands and mingling glances till the moon has taken flight. And to and fro we leap, and we chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles and anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, and with a fairy hand in hand, for the world is more full of weeping than you should ever understand. William Butler Yeats. So there you go. So it's like that's our fucking culture. It's great. Why would you want to be looking at Simon Cowell and all that shite when you have this, And then you boys like Tolkien and all ripping us off and making a clean fortune out of it. And then a guy from New Zealand makes a film out of it and makes even more. And we're sitting here going, oh Jesus,
You mentioned earlier on the role of the sort of healing women.
Yes,
in the
band facets, the wise women.
And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about, I guess the role of women in Irish folklore, mm-hmm. and the roles that they've assumed in the stories, or the roles that they're given, mm-hmm. or that they played in the stories.
Well, women, ancient Ireland was very much what's the word? What's the word?
Matriarchal.
That's the one. Thank you. I won't try and say it, but that's it. A matriarchal society, exactly. You have like Queen Maeve and all the rest of it, and they were very, very respected, and they were feared and revered in equal measure. But in the stories, women play a massive role. A lot of the stories, the person that would deal with the problem, with it was usually the man who started the problem in the stories. Like, he'd go off and he'd cut down a fairy tree, or he'd do something daft, and it was usually the woman that resolved it. And that's very much a thing in Irish sort of culture. It's usually the woman that kind of keeps everyone in line, and and sort of, the man, he does whatever, but it's very much the man that calls the shots, like, yourself. Yeah. And that comes across an awful lot in this, but it's not in a kind of a, that sort of almost British kind of like, her indoors, the ball and chain and that kind of stuff. It's not like that at all. They're spoken about in a very, like there's something to be admired. There's something to be almost, I get the impression that, from the stories, that the women seem to have a closer connection to their world than men did, because probably because, they're more sensitive and stuff like that. I don't know, but they just seem to have these very important roles within the stories. They were healers, they were carers, they were delegators, they were leaders, and but having said that, on the flip side of that, they were also, like, when the shit hit the fan, it was the women that really, like, came after you, like the Morrigan, for example, the witch. You have, of course, a lot of these band fasces, when they were demonized and became Cailleachs, they were extradited. They were sent up. They basically ended up living like hermits and stuff, and they were feared and stuff. So as a reaction to that, they would put curses on people and stuff like that, and so they were feared. So basically, it was like it all goes back to this thing, like, it's all working fine, everyone's getting on grand. But why? But it was fear. It was like the men's fear of, these women are taking over. They're telling us what to do, and we'll show them. And then they did what they did. So as a result, then it's a bit like Brexit. It's a bit like, we'll show them, and then, like, it's, fuck, what have we done? Should we made a balls of that, lads?
And you look at some of the stories, like the Children of Lure, and even Finn McCool and Niamh Canor. The women seem to possess quite magical traits where they can cast a spell on men or children or something.
The fairies were afraid of women as well, because women just seem to have. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to say I know, but they like, it was very, very important to me that I wrote this book with my wife. Because she's very into it. But also because she just she has a real compassion for this sort of thing, and I think it was interesting, because when I was writing some of the stuff in that, and I was kind of maybe saying certain things and stuff, and she would say, that's, you can't really say that, and I wouldn't really put it that way. And to have a kind of woman's point of view on it, because the thing about these stories is that they deal with stuff that's very, very sensitive, and I didn't realise it until we started writing this book, and even myself and Paula were talking about it, like things like child death and stuff like that, mental illness, suicide, serious, heavy stuff. A lot of these subject matters were explained and understood and accepted through these stories, and the belief was that there were people that just didn't belong here, but there was a better place for them. It wasn't heaven, it was somewhere else. And because of the other problem was, you see, if you think about it, like, the people were persecuted by the church. If a child died before it was baptized, it went into limbo. It's horrible stuff. Suicide victims went to hell. Babies were buried outside of cemeteries if they weren't baptized. They were buried in fields, These fairy stories gave these people, these poor souls, a place to go, a place to belong, a place of refuge, a place of sanctuary. That's so fucking important.
In a way, that is a major thread of, like, helping people deal with the realities of life are coming through these folktales.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, like, look at, like, what the church did, like the Magdalene wash houses and stuff like that. Like, years ago, if a woman got pregnant, you know, and the dad disappeared or whatever, she would go to a Banfassa. The Banfassas were midwives as well, so they would have helped her give birth. They would have helped her with the child. They probably would have, if the mother was sickly or something, they'd organise a wet nurse. You know, all these things. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there was a humanity there.
It's kind of a societal structure in a way.
Exactly. But then, you know, this stuff came in, and that was all done away. That was all seen, and then these poor creatures were thrown into these Magdalen washhouses. And if you were unfortunate enough to, you know, suffer from depression or something, you were locked up in St. Luke's, you know, for the rest of your life.
Another thing that I sense that maybe that there's value in reconnecting with these sort of folklore stories, and it's something that you've already mentioned, but our connection with the land and the herbs, and the way that, because we were like a rural kind of people, that we would have foraged a lot.
Yeah,
it's something that I'd love to learn more about at some stage. But
Pat Noon's the man to talk to. He'll tell you all. He knows all the herbs.
And today, like, you know, we look at the actual health state of all the Western countries. It's more and more important to get back to the land and way, and back to being able to learn more about food.
I see it myself. I mean, I grew up in rural County Kildare, and I cycled everywhere, and because you had to, because there's no fucking buses around, you know. And then, you know, I started living. I left. I went to college, just found myself living in kind of urban situations. Got lazy, and you know, as I used to have a 6-pack, now I got a barrel of Guinness. You know, and I think, you know, you can become very disconnected with stuff. And these stories, they just show you the importance of looking after yourself, looking after the people around you, looking after, if someone is in trouble, you don't fucking walk past them, you know. You take them home, you look after them, you know. I mean, my granduncle, he lived in Chicago. He's dead a long time now. He was a good age when he died. He was in his 90s. He died about nearly 30 years ago. But I remember Uncle Dud, we used to call him. He was a cop in Chicago back in the 30s when Al Capone was on the go, and he had some amazing stories. But he said to me when he went over to America, you know, just when the Wall Street crash had happened, and the place was in an awful state. And there was a guy, they were coming home from somewhere, and there was a guy lying on the side of the street, and he was very well dressed, and he was drunk, he was passed out. Now back home in Ireland, you saw a drunk on the side of the street like that, you brought him home, you gave him a cup of tea, and maybe and even an old couch for the night, you know, because that's what you did, and that's what they did with this fella. And they brought him back, and they gave him a cup of tea or whatever, and blah blah blah. And when he sobered up, he was like, "Lads, thanks so much," because he was a politician, and it was during Prohibition. So if he was caught drunk during Prohibition, he was finished. And he basically said, "Boys," he says, "thanks so much." He says, you have 3 choices. Now, these boys were unemployed; they had nothing. He said, the cops, the fire brigade, or the post office, whichever one you want. And Uncle Doug decided to become a cop. Right in the middle of it all, but he's some great stories about the mobsters and all the rest of it, you know. But you know, that's, as he said, if he hadn't have done that, if he hadn't have shown that bit of humanity, he mightn't have even survived. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a, you know, it's just, and that's what these stories are about. Just show a bit of fucking kindness. Now, not now bloody over the top stuff. Like, it has to be genuine as well, you know. I think nowadays as well, I think people are very fake with each other. It's like Facebook. You know, it's like, we're all so happy, and they're all killing each other.
Facebook.
Facebook, exactly. You know, it's about sort of, being sort of true to yourself and the people around you, and not looking for anything in return. But if you do good things, it's like positive energy. The more positive energy you put out there. Now, that's very easy for me to say. I can be one of the most negative, bloody pessimistic feckers you'll ever meet, but I'm seeing it, and a lot of it's through the research. I'm meeting the characters. I mean, the amount of people and I have met. I mean, characters, like amazing characters, like Pat Noon, like Eddie Lennon, like, you know, my man Bragan from Offaly, you know, loads of the list goes on, like just all these wonderful characters, and that I would never have met. And these people are in touch with the land, they're in touch with their, you know, and they're just and they're not. And you know what's lovely about them? They're not going around the place fucking all hippie shit. Like they're just normal, ordinary people. You know, they're not telling everyone, "Look at me, I'm a great. I grew a plant." You know, no, this is what they do, and they're saying, "Look, it works for me." You know. So like it's you know, you don't. It's like a subtlety. It's like trying to live the best you can, but don't go around telling everyone. Just get on.
You mentioned about Irish people going to America, which is obviously a big part of our history in this country,
massive part.
And when I was speaking to Maria, we touched on the subject of storytelling being a way to bring yourself off to a different place, regardless of what's happening around you. And when you think of all the people,
an illustration of boys going to America.
Yes. When you think of all the Statue of Liberty there, when you think of all the people who went there, forced sort of like against their will, really, like they were forced to emigrate and things like that, and the storytelling played a big part over there. I'm just thinking about the opening lines of that song, Nancy Spain. Last night as I lay dreaming of pleasant days gone by, my mind being bent on wandering to Ireland's isle did fly. And then they go off to the market.
That's right. It was the 24th of June, the day before the fair, when Ireland's sons and daughters did all assemble there. The young, the old, the brave, the bold, their duties to fulfil at the little church in Clooney, in the town called Spansel.
Oh. But that's amazing, isn't it? That you can just imagine people sitting around a pig thinking about if they're ever going to get back to Ireland, because back then, like, people didn't come back to the place that they were forced to go away from.
They didn't, like, and I mean, it must have been absolutely terrifying. I mean, can you imagine what it must have been like to live on a wee plot of land somewhere in Mayo, and all of a sudden you're in New York? Jeez, it must have been terrifying, you know. But like, you know, those people were great people. Like when you think of what they did, and you know, and what they achieved, and how respected the Irish are in America, you know. And do you know why that is? It's because we fucking stuck to our guns with our culture. You know, you see, if you, I think, you know, it's important to obviously, you know, interact with everything, and that's really important. But you need to know where you come from yourself. Because as I said earlier, if you don't have a sense of who you are, where you're from, it's very easy for someone else just to take over, you know. And if you, so what the problem with the tragedy was that, you know, Irish people are, you know, very fucking trusting as well, you know. You know, the same things happened over and over and over again in Irish history, where people come in from the outside and you think, you know, whether it be a religion, a different religion, Christianity, whether it be a political system, whatever, you know, when they come in, and it starts off like, yeah, that'll be all right, you know. It's like when the soldiers first came in 1969, they were making them cups of tea, you know, and then it all just, it all goes horribly wrong. And I think what you know, what the fundamental thing is that, you know, when I think, you know, what these stories are about, and it's so important, it's about self-respect, right? And it's also about being confident in yourself. The fairy folk, the Sheila, you won't meet a more confident shower of feckers. They think they are class. Now, I'll tell you something. You probably know this yourself, Anna. The people who tend to succeed the most in life are not the most talented, are not the most gifted, they're the most bloody confident, you know? And Irish people have an awful habit of apologising. You know, sorry. Like, what are you fucking sorry for? I'm sorry for me existence, you know? And what these stories do is a lot of that, they reckon, came from the backlash, the famine. They reckon before the famine that like Irish literature was a lot more racy and stuff. Like there's a great book by a guy called Brian Merriman called The Midnight Court, and it's all about a fella who falls asleep on a fairy hill in County Clare, and he wakes up and the fairies are all about him, and they're basically holding him to court because he's human, but they want to keep him because humans have big dicks. And all the women fairies want to ride him. It's mad shit, like, and you know, and you're reading this, and then after the famine and when the church took over, there was no sign of that. And who actually did revitalize that kind of that confidence in literature was James Joyce. And he was persecuted for that.
Isn't there a book of letters or something that he had written to his lover or something like that?
There was, I'm not sure. Yes. It was, what was her name? Oh, Jesus. That's right. And the really, yeah. What was her name? What was her fucking name? That's going to do my head.
Was it Nora Barnacle?
That, well done. Good man. Jeez, I was like, it was something shell. It was a shell or something. It was one shell. It was yeah. You're absolutely, Nora Barnacle. You're absolutely right. That stuff was very, and the Celts. You know, that was the other thing as well. I mean, you know, it was the whole thing as well with the women and stuff. I mean, you know, ironically, in cultures where women are treated better, there's not as much hang-ups about sex and stuff, because obviously if you're going to be a bollocks, well, you're not going to get much in that department, you know. But if you're nice and you're friendly and you're not a complete dickhead, you know, so you know, it's really easy to see that if when you go back, like even the Celtic stuff, the early Irish stuff, the literature, there's not the same hang-ups about sex. There's not the same hang-ups about being a man, being a woman, or any of that stuff, you know. And it was only, and that stuff only really kind of came into play later on.
And I think about German and Grania.
Yeah,
is a classical kind of story about like heavily.
Very much so. I mean, sure. I mean, even like in the time, you know, they talk about this owl fella coming into battle, and he was so old that his balls were hanging down and they were swinging and hitting both his ankles, you know. And you know, and another story.
Were they saying that was a good sign?
No, they were just
like he had big balls. As if
they were saying, it was like. Well, no, they were sort of laughing at him. They were just saying he was so old.
Oh, great.
He was so old and he was so wrinkly that his ball sack was hanging down between his legs, you know. And you know, but the thing about it is, my point is that was humour. Now, if you told a joke like that now, 2,000 years later, you'd still get a laugh. And that was genuine. And then what happened was, you know, things got watered down. I mean, there's another great story from the, you know, where Cuchulainn came back from some battle, and he was after having one of his warp spasms, and he was going buck mad, you know. And the only way they could get him calmed down was for all the women to bare their breasts on him. Have you heard that one before? You know, so this was, but you know, like we were fairly like the one about the French being all a bit that way, you know, a bit racy, you know. The Irish were fucking, you know, and those stories, you know, it's not just that side, but it's you know, it's okay to be human. It's okay to be fucking attracted to someone. It's okay to have those urges. It's all, and then the fucking church came along. You're going to hell. You're going to hell. You're going to. Shit, that was toward the arse out of it. So that's why this stuff is so bloody important. So there you go.
Can I transport you back to your granny's knee in Galway? And do you have any stories that you remember from back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, she would have told stories about the Banshee, of course, you know, and she would have talked about the curse of the Banshee, the mark of the Banshee. And the mark of the Banshee was when, if the Banshee, she would scratch it, usually across the face. And when you got the mark of the Banshee, you got what was known as the curse of the Banshee. And the curse of the Banshee means wherever you went, wherever you did, the Banshee would be there. So you'd be sitting there and you look over and she was sitting beside you. You go up the stairs, she's down the top of the stairs. You go out to the car, she's sitting in the passenger seat. She's everywhere. Imagine what it's like if you have to go to the toilet, huh? And, you know, but that's the thing, you know, stuff like that. And she'd talk about changelings, and she'd talk about children being stolen by the fairies and stuff like that. And there's a great story that she told me as a child, and about a boy who had no story, and it's a really famous story. And I read in a book many years later, collected by a great folklorist from County Limerick called Frank Danaher. I mean, I could tell you the story. Like, would you like to hear it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I first heard the story from my grandmother, and it was her version of it. And then I read Frank Danaher's version, and then I heard another version from another guy from Kerry called, I can't think of his name, but it'll come to me. But Eddie Lanahan as well would do the story, and it's all about a boy called Tom. And as my grandmother would say, Tom lived in a time when you had nothing, you had nothing. And if you wanted something, you had to work for it, and that's just the way it was. Because if you didn't do any work, you ended up in the workhouse. And a workhouse was a place that was... people would... apparently were happier to die in the ditches than go to a workhouse. And these poor souls that didn't have proper employment, didn't have a skill, didn't have a trade, they were known as hard workers. And they go to these things called hiring fairs. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before. It's quite barbaric when you think about it. Like, children and everything went to these. Imagine like a poor, it's awful. Like, but anyway, but these go, and these old bollockses of farmers would come along and basically hire them to work on their land. It's a form of slave labour, let the truth be known. But the Irish word for these people was spalpeens, and the spalpeens were the older spalpeens, were very popular. And the reason for this, Anna, was because they were great storytellers. They would travel from village to village, townland to townland, town to town, house to house. And they get to hear all the gossip and all the stories and all the news. And, back in a time before you had radio and television, that was a great thing to have, And the more stories you knew, and the better the stories you knew, the more work you got. And that was the way it was. But this particular character, Tom, was a great worker. He did everything you asked him to do, brilliant, but he had no stories. Not feckin' one. Let the truth be known, he bore the shite out of you, Couldn't even tell you the time of day. And as a result of this, poor old Tom was getting it tight, trying to get a bit of work. So he'd knock on someone's door and they'd say, no, Tom, not today. There's a wee woman coming up the road after you there now, and she's a great storyteller, we'll hire her instead. And then, as a result of this, it wasn't long before they could get no work at all. And Tom was there walking through some class of a field, starving. His belly was grumbling. The clothes were hanging off him. He had no work, he had no food, he had nowhere to stay. Because as a spalpeen, when you did the work, you got a bite to eat and an old shed to sleep in. He had none of this. And he thought to himself, surely to God, things can't get any worse. Well, believe me, Anna, when you've been around as long as I have, you'll find out things can and will always get fucking worse. And just as he said that, the heavens opened up and the rain started pouring down on town around him. And poor old Tom was there stuck in the middle of the storm. But he persevered. He kept going. And as he kept going, he saw a little light in the distance. And he thought, Jesus, where there's light, there's hope, So he kept walking towards the little light, and the closer he got to it, he realised it was coming from the window of a little cottage, a little whitewashed cottage with a thatched roof, the half door, the wee window, and to save on the window tax. And he went up to the door of the house, and he was just about to knock on the door, and I said, please God, let the people in this house let me in and be good to me and kind to me, and let me out of the rain for a while, and please God, don't make them ask me to tell them a story. So he raises his hand and he's about to knock on the door when the door opens. And there, standing in the doorway, is a big tall man, dressed in black. He's got a big long black head of hair and a big black beard and eyes that burn like coals. He looks like a cross between Rasputin and Count Dracula. He says, hello, Tom. How are you doing? I've been expecting you. Tom says, Jesus, I've never met this man in my life. Who is he? He says, Tom, you coward. He says, I'm free. He says, come in out of that now, Tom. So he comes inside and, the cottage is lovely and warm. Oh, it's lovely. There's a big fire blazing. And there's a wee crook hanging over the fire, and there's a pot hanging off the crook, and something's bubbling away inside of it, and the smell of it is only gorgeous. And the man says to Tom, "Tom, are you hungry?" Tom says, "I'm starving." He says, "Sit down there now." And he sits down in a wee chair, and there's a wee little table in front of him. The man just runs his hand across the table, and a big bowl of stew appears, and a cup of buttermilk, and a few slices of wheaten bread, and a big slap of butter. Oh, he's never seen food like this in all his days. Beautiful, beautiful. He eats the whole lot up, and the man says, "Tom, are you tired?" Tom says, "I'm flipping exhausted." He says, "There's a room there for you, Tom." So he points to a door, and Tom thanks him, and he gets up and he opens the door, and behind the door, sure enough, there's a room, and in the room there's a wee bed, and it's got fresh linen sheets, and covering a beautiful feather mattress, and big plump feather pillows, and a beautiful warm woolen blankets. Oh my goodness, sure Tom, sure he thinks he's died and gone to heaven. Poor old Tom was only used to sleep in old hay barns and sheds, and half the time he'd be sharing it with a lock of pigs or cattle or something, you know. So as soon as his head hit the pillow, sure didn't he fall fast asleep. Well, during the night, Tom was woken up by something poking him in the eye, and something twisting his ear, and something pulling his hair. And he opened his eyes, and he looked up, and there's 3 wee boys looking down on him. 3 wee feckin' bollockses. Oh, evil-looking creatures, you know, and they're all sniggering and tithering and laughing and nudging each other. "Hello, Tom, how are you doing, Tom? Are you a lazy boy, Tom?" "It's awful lazy." "Oh, awful lazy. Lazy fagger, Tom. Look at lying in bed, Tom." "Oh, lazy, lazy boy, Tom." And one of them is laughing, and Tom can see his teeth, and they're all rotten. And he sees an old worm come from between his teeth and wriggle its way out of his mouth, up into his nose, come out his eye, and back into his ear again, and continue the process a few more times. And then the boys start laughing hysterically. "Oh, Tom, we have a job for you, Tom. We have some job for you." And one of them grabbed Tom by the hair of the head and pulled him out of the bed, and he landed on the floor. And there on the floor beside him was a coffin. The 3 boys started looking at each other and nudging each other, going, "Who's going to carry the coffin?" "Tom will." "Come on now, Tom, come on. Put your back into it, Tom." And they threw the coffin onto his back, and they kicked him, and they punched him, and they brought him out through the front door out into the night. And the terrible storm was still raging, and the wind and the rain was howling around him. But the 3 little demons, they punched Tom, and they kicked him, and they called him terrible names, and used words so awful it would make the angels cry in heaven. They took him to a graveyard. There was a big wall around the graveyard, and he says, "Tom, now, carry the coffin over the wall." And Tom says, "What?" He said, "Don't, Joe, don't answer back, just do it." And they start, "Come on now, Tom, put your back into it, Tom. Come on now, Tom, you man or mouse, Tom. Come on now, Tom, come on, Tom. For feck's sake, Tom, you're useless, Tom, useless, useless." So Tom, he couldn't take any more of the abuse, so he just lifted up the coffin, and he threw it over the wall. And he jumped over the wall on the other side, and landed on the ground, and he was totally out of breath. And as soon as he done this, the 3 little whores walked a few yards the other direction, opened the gate, and walked inside. And then they brought him to a wee plot where a shovel was sticking out of the plot. Aye. And the boys got awful excited then. Oh, terrible excited. One fella nearly did a backflip, you know, I think he did, but he just landed on his arse. And he says, "Who's going to dig the grave?" "Tom will." "Come on now, Tom, dig a hole, Tom. Come on now, Tom, for God's sake, Tom. You're a man or a mouse, Tom, you're pathetic, Tom. Come on, dig a hole, dig, 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 dig." And they shoved the shovel into Tom's hands, and some digging and digging and digging and digging and digging until he found himself in a big hole. He looked up, and the 3 boys were looking down at him. And they grabbed him by the hair of the head, and they lifted him out. And then they looked at Tom, and they looked at the coffin. They looked at Tom, and they looked at the coffin again. And then they looked at the coffin, and they looked at Tom. "Who's going to go in the coffin?" "Tom will, Tom will." And they lifted him by the legs and the arms, one grabbed him by the hair, and they pulled him up, and they threw him inside the coffin. And the lid of the coffin was thrown on top of him, and Tom was trapped inside the coffin. And he could hear the sound of the nails being hammered in. Tap, 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 tap. Well, now, there was Tom trapped inside the coffin. The air was going. It was so dark he couldn't see the finger in front of his nose. Oh, bejeebers, he was scared. And he started fighting with the lining of the coffin, screaming out, "Help, help, somebody help me, please, please help me, I'll do anything, I'll even learn a story." But then he heard the muffled voices of the boys saying, "Who will go inside the grave?" "Tom will." And Tom felt the coffin being lifted up, and boom, down into the hole he went. And then he heard the sound of the earth being thrown on top of the coffin, and there he was trapped inside, fighting with the lining of the coffin, begging for help, screaming for help, promising he'd even learn a story. And as he did this, he found himself fighting with the sheets of his bed. Oh, thanks be to Jesus, it was just all a bad dream. So he lifted the sheets off his bed, and he was still in all his clothes, and his boots were still on, covered in mud. Very strange, most peculiar. So he gets out of the bed and he walks over to the door, and he opens the door, and the tall, thin man dressed in black is sitting there smoking his pipe. "Well, Tom, did you sleep all right last night?" "Oh, be jeepers, I'm not sure about that. No, I'm not sure. Oh, that's awful sad now, Tom. Tell me another thing, Tom. Do you have a story to tell?" "Well, funny enough, I was in the bed last night, and just before he got a chance to start it, the tall man stand up and take a deep breath, and he says, 'Who will tell us a story?' And the three little feckin' whores come flying down the chimney going, 'Tom will, come on now, Tom, tell a story. Tom, we love stories. Oh, yeah, Tom, come on, tell a story. Jack and Ori, anything you got. Oh, Shrinking Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood, Seven Dwarfs, and they all shakily do, we love it.' And they jumped up on his shoulders, and he ran out into the field in front of the wee house, and he hit the ground with the three demons hanging on to him. And he thought that was it. He thought, I'm a goner now, I'm finished. But as soon as he hit the ground, the three little men disappeared. When he looked over his shoulder, the cottage had disappeared too. All that was left was a ball of mist. But let me tell you something. From that day onwards, Tom the Spalpeen was never, ever, ever out of work. Everybody wanted to hire Tom, because Tom the Spalpeen had the greatest, the best story that anyone had ever heard. There you go.
Oh.
Shinny on scale.
Brilliant. Thank you for telling that story.
So you can imagine as a young fella listening to that,
Yeah.
And and the wind and the rain outside, and you're living by the sea in Galway, and these stories, that's the sort of stuff I grew up listening to, and it was beautiful.
When you think about that story, and what lesson is behind that story?
Well, the lesson is that nothing is handed to you. Tom was a hard worker and stuff, but the fact of the matter was, for him to succeed, he had to learn stories. He had to learn a story. He wouldn't, for whatever reason. So the fairies felt sorry for him. He was probably an orphan. These were usually orphans. The fairies were good, but they had a funny way of doing things, And they obviously took pity on him. I said, we're going to teach this boy a story he'll never forget.
Yeah. And I was also thinking that when he was saying to himself, I'll even learn a story in the coffin.
Yeah.
But it was like, that was the story.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing for a lot of us to take away as well, is that you can be thinking that you're going off and you've nothing really.
It's looking at you the whole time.
You've nothing decent to offer, but in actual fact you're going through, and the journey is the story. In a way.
What it also is about life is that life is never easy, and people always go, oh, life is so hard, and life is this, and life is that. But as I talk to say people like Raymond and that, if he didn't go through what he went through, he wouldn't be able to create that wonderful work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyone who's ever really contributed anything has been through shit. Do you know what I mean? What I said, the man who never made a mistake never made anything in his life. That's sort of what it's about. If that makes sense.
And listening to that story, there's a man there now getting buried alive by 3 smallies. That's a terrifying experience. And do you think that in the sort of modern sort of manifestation of storytelling through cartoons and things, have they been like over sanitized? You know, because everything's always, you wouldn't get a story on a cartoon saying of a man getting buried alive now, would you?
No. But then again, modern cartoons have gone a bit that way. I don't know if you ever watched Ren and Stimpy.
Oh yeah, no.
It's kind of gone that way a bit, you know. I used to love them, you know, and the boys looking in the window at them and stuff.
And what kind of reaction do you get when you go in and tell a story like that in a class of young people? What reaction do you get when you're looking into the crowd, into the audience? I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my trumpet or whatever the word is, but they're just sitting looking at you with their mouths open, you know, because the majority of these kids have never experienced a story like, you know, a real story being told. And one of the things I do as well with the kids is I've had them interact. And so, for example, when I'm saying, you know, and they says, who will carry the coffin? And all the kids, so you've like a school full, 200 kids, and they all go, Tom will! You know? And then they're part of the story, you see, you know. And, you know, so yeah, they love it, like, you know, they really do. And I think it's testimony that whether you're a child in 2019 or a child in 17, 19 or 16, 19, you're still a fucking child and you still love a story, you know. And kids, you know, and what's so important about storytelling is human interaction. Like, part of what I do is I work as a storyteller in the Royal Victoria Hospital on the Falls Road. And I've been working with them as their storyteller now for 6 years now or something. Yeah, 6 years. And it's great. And, you know, I go in and I do stories with the kids, and some of them are very young, 5, 6, some of them are... I've told stories to children that have gone in the next time and to find out that they've died, you know. And but the doctors, I've told stories to kids in hospital, and I remember there was one particular occasion where I was telling the story to this little fella, and we were playing music and stuff, and then another child came over and we all joined in and we were doing a bit of music, and I played the didgeridoo and stuff like that, and the kids think this is hilarious. And next thing I heard all this clapping, like, you know, clapping along, and all the doctors and the surgeons were behind us, and they were all joining in. And I thought that was a powerful thing. Do you know, like, these are people like that, you know, in my mind I'd be thinking like, oh, here's this fucking Egypt coming in, annoying us. No, they didn't. They saw that these kids are laughing, they're having the crack. And fucking hell's probably waiting for them, you know, in some fucking 10, 12 hour long surgery or something, you know. It's like you're transporting them away to some magical land.
But it's very humbling. It's very, very humbling for me. And I think, you know, that's what, again, it's that reminder of we're only here for a very, very, very short amount of time. Make the fucking most of it. You only get one lap. You know what I mean? And when you go in there and you see these poor children, and you're just thinking, these poor kids, like, should they, you know, but they're laughing and they're having the crack, and you're just thinking, geez, I'm the luckiest man on earth, you know. I mean, I could be one of those cunts that give out tickets for parking, you know. You know, my job is to make people miserable. you know, so, you know, that's just one example of the kids, and they see the importance. And I work with children from both sides of the community. I work with children with learning disability. I work with down south. I do a lot of work with kids, immigrant children, right across the board. Yeah. I know the one thing they all have in common, Anne. They're all children, and they're all the same. It's only when the adults start getting involved that all goes tits up.
But then the other thing is that, like, you're really like helping adults reconnect with their inner child.
Oh yeah,
as well.
Well, that's true. That's a good point.
And that, like, a lot of today is kind of like geared at like making people grow up very fast. And
it's awful. Like, I mean, kids are not allowed. I mean, like when I was a child, there was no such thing as the internet or like that. Like, you know, and kids are just exposed to so much now. It's I mean, the stuff on the internet scares the shit out of me. I can't imagine what it would do to a child. Like, I remember a friend of mine showed me this website called rotten.com. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I was like, who wants to look at this? What a universe, you know? But like, I was thinking, like, it's just, it's there's too much, and children's innocence are being taken away from them too quickly and stuff.
But that kind of lines up with the, I guess, kind of a bit of a theme of this chat that we're having, in that if there's something so rich as storytelling, where your imagination is firing on all cylinders and you're transported off to some magical land, that's a very, it's a very rich experience in a way, and if that is there, then it doesn't leave so much space for kind of more negative things. And if it isn't there, then it does leave a bit of a vacuum for other stuff to come in.
Well, that's it. I mean, I just show there's a quote here that we use from Yeats at the start of the book, which I think sums it all up. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful quote. If I can find it now. Jeez, the fairies are playing tricks on me.
The page is gone.
They love playing tricks on me. They really do. Let me show you now. It says, "Let us go forth, the tellers of tales, and seize whatever prey the heart longs for. And have no fear. Everything exists, everything is true, and the earth is only a little dust under our feet." William Butler Yeats. Beautiful. And like when I'll be working with the kids in the hospital and that, like, I mean, you're just looking at them and they just, they just forget. I mean, it happens as well, like, where, kids will be getting injections and drips put in, and it's very painful and stuff. And the doctors would ask me to maybe, just talk to them for a while, tell them a story while they're doing it, just to keep their mind off it and stuff like that, And, so there's a possibility maybe I might be doing, I'll keep you posted, I might be doing a wee documentary with the BBC about the work I do in the hospital. So
are you in there? How often are you in there?
I mean, every month.
Every month? Yeah. For a day?
Yeah. And it's through a group called Read for Good. That's their charity. Actually, their main patron is, do you remember Baldrick from Blackadder?
Oh, yeah.
Tony Robbins. He's the main man behind it, Yeah. But that's one of the things that I would do, and working with kids with severe. I work a lot with children with severe learning disability and stuff like that, and they respond to it very, very well.
You know what? It springs to mind that what you're doing there really is kind of, it's like a crossing over of art and the whole academic and medical side of things. And a lot of the time seem to be quite separated, and
I never thought of it that way, but yeah, you're right.
Like times of recession, it's like the arts, they're gone.
Yes.
The funding is cut. Whereas people don't realise the true deep value of having this as part of our society.
Well, it was stories about, like, during the Second World War and stuff, when places were being looted and raided and all, but it was always made sure that the art was protected, because that's what kept, even though everyone was fucking killing each other and just, that's what kept us human. That's what separated us from the animals, was the art, because we were just once you take that away, you're just, you're fucked.
Yeah. How can people find out more about everything that you're doing at the moment? Books and the storytelling events?
How can people find out about what, sorry?
All the stuff that you're doing.
Oh, God. Well, I have I'm on Facebook, and I have a website, www.storyman.info, which I'm terrible at updating. Funny, I was talking to my wife about it. She's going to try and, because I'm typical sort of storyteller in the sense I tell stories till the cows come home, but don't ask me to be doing any kind of proper writing down accounts and all this shite.
That's the whole point of being a storyteller. Yes. That's why it's called storytelling.
Exactly. But
have to come and find you somewhere.
So no, I if ever I'm doing any kind of gigs, I usually put them up on Facebook and that public kind of stuff. I do a lot of stuff in libraries and things like that. I do work with a lady called Liz Weir. I don't know if you've heard of her before. She's a great storyteller from Antrim. So do stuff like that. on, like, for example, now on Halloween, if anyone's listening, I'm doing ghost stories for Halloween all day in Crossmaglen Library, and everyone's welcome.
There's definitely a few ghosts around Crossmaglen.
Oh yes, indeed, and it's great storytelling country around here. My wife's related to one, probably one of, well, no, not probably, definitely one of the greatest storytellers that ever came out of this country, a man called John Campbell. Wonderful storyteller. He's from Mullabon up the road there. He's first cousin of Paul. Second cousin is her dad's first cousin of John Campbell. But John Campbell was just a fucking great storyteller. Jesus, he was funny as fuck as well. And he'd tell these little wishy short ones, because people would say, "Tell us a story, John, tell us a story," and he'd be literally like, coming out of a shop, and he'd have to tell us, but he was the sort of boy he would, like, but like, he great ones. He a great one is very relevant to here. There's two boys sitting in the pub and they're chatting to each other, and one boy says to the other, "It's an awful shame they got rid of the town lands for the postal system." And the other boy says, "What on earth are you talking about?" He says, "Sure, it's all BT this and BT that, and sure, it takes the whole character out of it." And the other fella says, "Well, I know a boy who would totally disagree with you there." He says, "Why?" He says, "I was a lot of years ago now, during the hard times. He was visiting a friend, he was on his way home, he was stopped by the soldiers, and they put the gun in the window and says, 'Where were you?' He says, 'Killing a man.' 'What?' 'Killing a man.' 'Right. Where are you off to?' 'To kill more.'" And he spent the rest of his days in Long Kesh. And there's two townlands, Killing a Man and Killing a Moor,
Yes.
Kilmore, and but just little things like that. But that was the importance, you see. And you have to remember, he was telling these stories in a time when people were being fucking stopped by the Brits and were being fucking tortured. I mean, Paula's dad would tell you stories, and being lifted into the barracks and stuff, and mad stuff, mad.
The barracks that was just across the road.
Yeah. They bring him in, and they took a photo. He told me he's a lovely man, Sean, you call him, and the fuckers brought him in, and they took a photograph of him with one of these, the old-fashioned cameras. And there was something but had the big bulb on it when I go boom like that, And they said, "This is the photograph of you when you've left here, but you haven't left yet." And then they punched him in the face after they took the photograph. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now, so the stories were important because there were power people had. I mean, your brother talked about it, being able to speak the language was almost like a weapon that you could talk about people without them knowing and have a conversation that certain people you didn't want to hear and whatever. And the stories were like that. There were a lot of great comedians like that, Billy Connolly and people like that. They deal with really dark stuff through humour. I mean, to me, Billy Connolly is a storyteller.
Yeah.
Number one, he is a storyteller. And another Irish guy who was great, a guy called Dave Allen. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was brilliant. But like these guys, like they challenged the church. They challenged the establishment. They challenged fucking everything.
There's a great clip of Dave Allen on YouTube about how to teach a kid how to tell the time.
I love
I don't know
that.
if you've seen this. Very funny, isn't it?
It's got three hands. The first hand, the second hand, and the third hand.
But the third hand is the second hand.
The third hand is the second. That's right. Oh, brilliant. Okay. And at the end of it, I'll get you a digital watch.
Yeah. Actually, seeing as we're around this area, I remember very well, I must have been around 7 or 8 years of age whenever the checkpoint was still going fully functioning around here, and we were on the road with a play with Ashtorian drama, and my dad always had a shitty transit van.
Oh, cool, a transit van.
Drive the sets around, and this particular one had a problem with the engine that every time I turned it off, it did backfire.
Oh,
we were stopped at the checkpoint,
right?
And British soldiers like, "Oh, where are you going? Where are you coming from?" And I actually remember this van. For some reason, there was a really strong smell of petrol coming from inside the van. I think it was because there was an old boat engine as part of the set or something. I kind of vaguely remember that. Anyway, but this British soldier with camouflage and all on was like fairly certain he wanted the engine of the van to be turned off. My dad turned it off, and then backfire. So all of them hit the deck with 20 odd soldiers thought they were being
shot at,
attacked.
I could just imagine that, like. But like there's great stories from around here where one of the things they used to do was they used to have like checkpoints and stuff, obviously. But they'd have a boy, right, and his job was to drive to the checkpoint all day long, and he'd drive around, and while he was doing that, that would keep the Brits occupied. Sure, the boys be off doing a bit of work somewhere else. You know?
A few wee jobs.
A few wee jobs, you know, but little things like, but you hear all sorts of stories. But I mean, that was one of the things as well I found very humbling coming from the south of Ireland, coming from the Republic, you know. We fucking got the Republic and then we handed it over to the church. Fucking well done, boys, you know. Out of the frying pan into the fire, you know. And, you know, as I say, it says, ye had the troubles, we had the Catholic Church. You know, I went to the Christian Brothers, you see, so I fucking had, you know, had the shite, tell you. But anyway, it was just very humbling though coming up here back in 2000 and you know meeting people like your dad and stuff like that, and just how very kind the people were and stuff. Thinking about the history of the place, and there was the only time we ever came across that was when we were kids going to the Gaeltacht in Donegal. We used to go to the Gaeltacht in Gweedore, and back in the 80s, and just before the border you get stopped, and it was very frightening. I remember one time my ma bringing us up, and she says, whatever you say to the soldiers, don't tell them you're going to the Gaeltacht. Don't tell them you're going to the Gaeltacht. And then we got stopped, and of course the soldier puts the gun in the window. Where are you going? And she goes, the Gaeltacht. And then the brother pipes up, oh, Mammy, you said not to tell the soldiers we're going to. And they're like, oh, she's like fucking rosary beads out, like, you know. But like, I mean, that was just one little incident. But I can't imagine what it must have been like to have that 24/7. Like, it must have been a fucking nightmare. You know, and it's one of the reasons why I've chosen to live in the north of Ireland, because I find people here, they're just sort of straight with you, and what you see is what you get. You know, and that's good. I find down south people are very nice, but then they fucking murder you behind your back. You know? Yeah. Whereas people up here, if they think you're a cunt, they'll just fucking tell you. You know, I remember your dad, fair play to me, one of the best lines I ever heard. I was when I was doing the editing and the cultural on, and I came in and I had a broken arm, my arm in a cast. I fell and broke my arm. And he says, Stevie, he says, you look like a man who was talking when you should have been listening. You know? I just thought that's brilliant, you know. And I mean, you know, even our wedding last year, you know, Raymond was there, and lots of people from here, and you know, and it was lovely. It was just great, and I just you know, and people from both sides of the community and everything, and I just think it's just up here. I just think people take things like culture and all very, very seriously up here, because identity is so important in the north, you know. That I just felt like that it's a bit watered down. It's a little bit watered down in the south. Not it's pure, you know, tourism and stuff like that. And
there could be an element of the fact that it was you know, probably more oppressed up here for a long time.
Exactly.
That people kind of clung to that identity, and also the fact that people needed a sense of, for all the things that we just talked about, and being able to transport yourself away for a while, or have a sense of control. Is like all those kind of be able to speak your own language, be able to tell your own stories and play your own music, or things that you can control in a way much more so than what's going on when there's kind of mayhem happening all around.
When there's mayhem and you know, I think as well that you know, just from what I've heard and stuff like that, you know, it was just you know, everything. You know, certainly living in central Belfast and that, like, I'm sure people probably lived every day like you go be their fucking lass, you know, and you know, so when people did things, they did it 100%. You know, there was no Ash will do it tomorrow, because fucking tomorrow might can come. You know, you know
that line from the song. They say that you can get used to the war, but that doesn't mean that the war isn't on.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Here,
So there you go.
How long have we been talking for?
I don't. Probably a long time, I'd say.
A good hour and a half there. That's what there is. Here, thanks very much for
listen, no problem.
the chat. It's been great.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thanks for coming. And here, if you want, I'll give you a wee tour around.
I'd love a tour. Yeah. Sorry, first of all, I forgot to ask you, how can people get your books?
Oh, yes. Okay, well, if people want to copy the book, you can get them in any major bookshops. They're available on the internet. If you want to get them through myself, just send me an email. It's stevelally6@gmail.com, and I will happily sell you a book. They're sterling. They're quite pricey. They're 18 sterling, and then euro is 20. But if you buy a copy from me, I shall sign it for you, and my wife will sign it for you as well. And I'll even do you a little drawing of one of the Shiada, So there you go.
Beautiful. Well, thanks very much. And maybe we'll have time to go and see a fairy tree.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's actually a fantastic fairy tree not far from here. But I'm going to ask Paula which boherine I have to take. So if you want to come with me,
yes, let's do it. Welcome to the storytelling section of the Rebel Matters podcast. If you've been listening to the episodes before this, then you know that the book that we're reading together at the minute is Boy Tales of Childhood by Roald Dahl. And if you want to go back to the start of the book, you can go to episode 52 and then skip to the end of the episode after the outro music, and you can hear the first couple of chapters, and then every subsequent episode has got a chapter or two in it. It's after turning into one of my favourite things about doing the podcast is just sitting here chilling out, reading a story. And it's the first time I've read this book as well, so we're kind of reading it together. This week's chapter is called A Drive in the Motor Car. Somehow or other, I got through the first term at St. Peter's, and towards the end of December, my mother came over on the paddle boat to take me and my trunk home for the Christmas holidays. Oh, the bliss and the wonder of being with the family once again after all those weeks of fierce discipline. Unless you've been to a boarding school, when you're very young, it's absolutely impossible to appreciate the delights of living at home. It's almost worth going away because it's so lovely coming back. I could hardly believe that I didn't have to wash in cold water in the mornings, or keep silent in the corridors, or say sir to every grown-up man I met, or use a chamber pot in the bedroom, or get flicked with wet towels while naked in the changing room, or eat porridge for breakfast that seemed to be full of little round lumpy grey sheep's droppings, or walk all day long in perpetual fear of the long yellow cane that lay on top of the corner cupboard in the headmaster's study. The weather was exceptionally mild that Christmas holiday, and one amazing morning our whole family got ready to go for our first drive in the first motor car we ever owned. This new motor car was an enormous long black French automobile called a Didion Bouton, which had a canvas roof that folded back. The driver was to be that 12 years older than me half-sister, now aged 21, who had recently had her appendix removed. She had received 2 full hour lessons in driving from the man who delivered the car, and in that enlightened year of 1925, this was considered quite sufficient. Nobody had to take a driving test. You were your own judge of competence, and as soon as you felt you were ready to go, off you jolly well went. As we all climbed into the car, our excitement was so intense that we could hardly bear it. "How fast will it go?" we cried out. "Will it do 50 miles an hour?" "It'll do 60, the ancient sister answered. Her tone was so confident and cocky, it should have scared us to death, but it didn't. "Oh, let's make it do 60, we shouted. "Will you promise to take it up to 60? "We shall probably go faster than that," the sister announced, pulling on her driving gloves and tying a scarf over her head in the approved driving fashion of the period. The canvas hood had been folded back because of the mild weather, converting the car into a magnificent open tourer. Up front, there were 3 bodies in all: the driver behind the wheel, my half-brother, aged 18, and one of my sisters, aged 12. In the back seat, there were 4 more of us. My mother, aged 40, 2 small sisters, aged 8 and 5, and myself, aged 9. Our machine possessed one very special feature which I don't think you see on the cars of today. This was a second windscreen in the back, solely to keep the breeze off the faces of the backseat passengers when the hood was down. It had a long centre section and 2 little end sections that could be angled backwards to deflect the wind. We were all quivering with fear and joy as the driver let out the clutch and the great long black automobile leaned forward and stole into motion. "Are you sure you know how to do it?" we shouted. "Do you know where the brakes are?" "Be quiet," snapped the ancient sister. "I've got to concentrate." Down the drive we went and out into the village of Llandaff itself. Fortunately, there were very few vehicles on the roads in those days. Occasionally, you met a small truck or a delivery van, and now and again a private car. But the danger of colliding with anything else was fairly remote, so long as you kept the car on the road. The splendid black tourer crept slowly through the village, with the driver pressing the rubber bulb of the horn every time we passed a human being, whether it was the butcher boy on his bicycle or just a pedestrian strolling the pavement. Soon we were entering a countryside of green fields and high hedges with not a soul in sight. "You didn't think I could do it, did you?" cried the ancient sister, turning around and grinning at us all. "Now you keep your eyes on the road," my mother said nervously. "Go faster," we shouted. "Go on, make her go faster. Put your foot down. We're only doing 15 miles an hour." Spurred on by our shouts and taunts, the ancient sister began to increase the speed. The engine roared and the body vibrated. The driver was clutching the steering wheel as though it were the hair of a drowning man, and we all watched the speedometer needle creeping up to 20, then 25, then 30. We were probably doing about 35 miles an hour when we came suddenly to a sharpish bend in the road. The ancient sister, never having been faced with a situation like this before, shouted "Help!" and slammed on the brakes and swung the wheel wildly around. The rear wheels locked and went into a fierce sideways skid, and then, with a marvellous crunch of mudguards and metal, we went crashing into the hedge. The front passengers all shot through the front windscreen, and the back passengers all shot through the back windscreen. Glass, there was no triplex then, flew in all directions, and so did we. My brother and one sister landed on the bonnet of the car. Someone else was catapulted out onto the road, and at least one small sister landed in the middle of the hawthorn hedge. But miraculously, nobody was hurt very much except me. My nose had been cut almost clean off my face, and as I went through the rear windscreen, and now it was hanging at my nose had been cut almost clean off my face as I went through the rear windscreen, and now it was hanging on only by a single small thread of skin. My mother disentangled herself from the scrimmage and grabbed a handkerchief from her purse. She clasped the dangling nose back into place fast and held it there. Not a cottage or a person was in sight, let alone a telephone. Some kind of bird started twittering in a tree further down the road. Otherwise, it was all silent. My mother was bending over me in the rear seat and saying, "Lean back and keep your head still." To that ancient sister she said, "Can you get this thing going again?" The sister pressed the starter, and to everyone's surprise, the engine fired. "Back it out of the hedge," my mother said, "and hurry." The sister had trouble finding reverse gear. The cogs were grinding against one another with a fearful noise of tearing metal. "I've never actually driven it backwards," she admitted at last. Everyone, with the exception of the driver, my mother and me, was out of the car and standing on the road. The noise of the gear wheels grinding against each other was terrible. It sounded as though a lawnmower was being driven over hard rocks. The ancient sister was using bad words and going crimson in the face. But then my brother leaned his head over the driver's door and said, "Don't you have to put your foot on the clutch?" The harassed driver depressed the clutch pedal and the gears meshed, and 1 second later, the great black beast leapt backwards out of the hedge and careered across the road into the hedge on the other side. "Try to keep cool," my mother said. "Go forward slowly." At last, the shattered motor car was driven out of the second hedge and stood sideways across the road, blocking the highway. A man with a horse and a cart now appeared on the scene, and the man dismounted from his cart and walked across to our car and leaned over the rear door. He had a big drooping moustache and he wore a small black bowler hat. "You're in a fair old mess here, aren't you?" he said to my mother. "Can you drive a motor car?" my mother asked him. "Nope," he said, "and you're blocking up the old road. I've got 1,000 fresh laid eggs in this cart and I want to get them to the market before noon." "Get out of the way," my mother told him. "Can you see there's a child in here who's badly injured?" 1,000 fresh laid eggs, the man repeated, staring straight at my mother's hand and the blood-soaked handkerchief and the blood running down her wrist. "And if I don't get them to market by noon today, I won't be able to sell them till next week. Then they won't be fresh laid anymore, will they? I'll be stuck with 1,000 stale old eggs that nobody wants." "I hope they all go rotten," my mother said. "Now back that cart out of our way this instant." And to the children standing on the road, she cried out, "Jump back into the car. We're going to the doctor." "There's glass all over the seats," they shouted. "Never mind the glass," my mother said. "We've got to get this boy to the doctor fast." The passengers crawled back into the car. The man with the horse and the cart backed off to a safe distance. The ancient sister managed to straighten the vehicle and get it pointed in the right direction. And then, at last, the once magnificent automobile tottered down the highway and headed for Dr. Dunbar's surgery in Cathedral Road, Cardiff. "I've never driven in a city," the ancient and trembling sister announced. "You're about to do so," my mother said. "Keep going." Proceeding at no more than 4 miles an hour all the way, we finally made it to Dr. Dunbar's house. I was hustled out of the car and in through the front door with my mother still holding the blood-stained handkerchief firmly over my wobbling nose. "Good heavens," cried Dr. Dunbar. "It's been cut clean off." "It hurts," I moaned. "He can't go round without a nose for the rest of his life," the doctor said to my mother. "It looks as though he may have to," my mother said. "Nonsense," the doctor told her. "I shall sew it on again." "Can you do that?" my mother asked him. "I can try," he answered. "I shall tape it on tight for now, and I'll be up at your house with my assistant within the hour." Huge strips of sticking plaster were strapped across my face to hold the nose in position. Then I was led back into the car and we crawled 2 miles home to Llandaff. About an hour later, I found myself lying upon that same nursery table that my ancient sister had occupied some months before for her appendix operation. Strong hands held me down while a mask stuffed with cotton wool was clamped over my face. I saw a hand above me holding a bottle with white liquid in it, and the liquid was being poured onto the cotton wool inside the mask. Once again, I smelled the sickly stench of chloroform and ether, and a voice was saying, "Breathe deeply. Take some nice deep breaths." I fought fiercely to get off that table, but my shoulders were pinned down by the full weight of a large man. The hand that was holding the bottle above my face kept tilting it further and further forward, and the white liquid dripped and dripped onto the cotton wool. Blood-red circles began to appear before my eyes, and the circles started to spin round and round until they made a scarlet whirlpool with a deep black hole in the centre. And miles away, the distant voice was saying, "That's a good boy. We're nearly there now. We're nearly there. Just close your eyes and go to sleep." I woke up in my own bed, with my anxious mother sitting beside me holding my hand. "I didn't think you were ever going to come around," she said. "You've been asleep for more than 8 hours. "Did Dr. Dunbar sew my nose back on again?" I asked her. "Yes," she said. "Will it stay on?" "He says it will." "How do you feel, my darling?" "Sick," I said. After I vomited into a small basin, I felt a little better. "Look under your pillow," my mother said, smiling. I turned and lifted a corner of my pillow, and underneath it, on the snow-white sheet, there lay a beautiful golden sovereign with the head of King George V on its uppermost side. "That's for being brave," my mother said. "You did very well. I'm proud of you."